Thanks once again for making a date. Welcome back to the markets, please. Now, the tendency of some rural and community banks board chairpersons to usurp administrative functions is raising concerns from individuals and groups. The Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, ICU, describes as unfortunate attempts to take over the mandate of technocrat administrators. It wants the Bank of Ghana to call such board chairmen to order by restricting them to their core policy formulation roles. Deputy General Secretary in charge of operations of the union, Morgan Ayawine, has been speaking with Prince Appiah.
The rural and community banks have assumed a major role in the socio-economic sector in the country. But some players in the financial sector have raised several questions about how the board chairman in the rural and community banks operates. President of the Western Region branch of the Association of Rural Banks, Dr. Tony Orbings, explains these behaviors do not augur well for the rural banking sector.
Now, we think that we should keep to the rules of the game. You know, when you're a board member or a board chairman, the bank is not yours. Your work is to provide sort of direction, guideline, guidance, leadership for the board to work. I mean, as a board chairman, I have no extra rights than any other board. And again, I tell our board members that your office is not in the bank. If you're a board member, you chose to become a board member. Your work is to go and help develop the bank in totality. It is not to go into management and say that, let me see your book, let me do this, let me do that. No, that is not your work.
Deputy General Secretary in charge of operations for ICU, Morgan Ayawine, says this behavior will not allow the banks to grow.
Please, you'll find a situation where the board chairmen are almost hijacking the administrative rules of the general manager and his management team. They have sometimes, you find some chairmen stooping so low to the level of signing query letters, termination letters, and dismissal letters. They are not supposed to do that. You cannot have this arrangement in any well-established institution, and then you have one person in an institution, calling the shots and handling the situation as though it is his or her personal enterprise. That will not allow the banks to grow.
He therefore wants the Bank of Ghana to crack the whip on them.
And we are appealing to Bank of Ghana to call the chairman of the rural and community banks to order so that they will be restricted to their core mandates and rules of formulation of policies, so that the general managers and supervising managers are allowed a leverage to deal with the aspects of administration, the day-to-day management of the institutions.
Meanwhile, the Bank of Ghana is putting in measures to check the tenure of office of chief executives of the rural and community banks to address some of these challenges. Prince Appiah, reporting.
Now, young CEOs and entrepreneurs have been urged to be more ethical in their business and also prioritize technology to be able to build companies that transcend generations. Minister for Business Development, Mohammed Awal, has been engaging business leaders on the Ghana Business Forum in Accra. He spoke with Charles Aite in an interview at the sidelines of the engagement.
We need the government to focus a lot on the private sector. Whilst government tries to give the policy direction, we need the private sector to take the lead in building and sustaining businesses. So I want to commend the organizers for this initiative. I think it's in order and it's in line with government development priorities.
In your submission, you talked about the concern that most of these businesses do not, hit the generational line. Most of them start 5 years later, they just collapse and everything. Is there a particular initiative or innovative idea from government to ensure that businesses are sustained?
You're right. There are several levels that government is looking at. I think one of the critical challenges we have is the macroeconomic environment. If you don't have stable electricity and you spend so much money buying generators and fuel, it can collapse your business. So that's why government, since we came to power nearly 2 years ago, have tried to stabilize the macroeconomic environment. Inflation has reduced drastically from 15.3% to a single digit 9.9 now. Interest rate, though still high, has come down from about 40% to 28%. We're also formalizing the economy, making sure that we have digital address system for business to do location. And like I said there, we want to improve the banking environment. If the banks are weak with poor corporate governance institutions, we cannot serve the private sector. So we want to make the private sector the heart of government business. We also introduce what I call the entrepreneurship bag. We want Ghanaians to feel and know that there's an ecosystem that supports you. Bring the ideas, bring the businesses, go and provide your business services and the funding. We supported 1,350 young entrepreneurs in the country with over 60 million today in the last 2-3 months at 10% interest rates. Essence to make them have money, not encumbered with high interest rates. We intend to do that every year.
Yeah. So we're going to be having the budget read somewhere in November. Any input from the ministry that's going to be geared for entrepreneurs?
Obviously, the budget will, among other things, hopefully, look at how to further consolidate what we already achieved, stabilize the macroeconomic environment, and then to bring in the private sector more and more into development. So entrepreneurship, pro-poor, and interventions like the FSS, Plan for Food and Jobs, one village, one dam, one village, where one is to one house, will continue. We want to create safety nets. At the same time, incentivize the private sector to continue to grow, create jobs, create wealth, and improve the lives of the people.
So does it mean we're going to be having an increase in funds for young entrepreneurs?
Yes, we have to have a bigger fund for entrepreneurs to source and to make sure the private sector is at the heart of it. Entrepreneurs would constantly be supported and encouraged what they can develop this country. Government partner entrepreneurs to make businesses sustainable.
Just before you leave, there's been this concern that under your ministry, there's been so many initiatives so far, so many programs for young entrepreneurs, but they seem so scattered for one to, let's say, pinpoint or find a directorate to have all these innovations. Have you thought about this very concern?
No, they are not so. They dovetail into one another. If you look at them, we take something we don't want to end. So they're all connected together, and all of them also dovetail into government priority areas. The bottom line, create an ecosystem that encourages young people to start business and to grow.
Charles Ainti talking to the Business Development Minister. And meanwhile, over 100 businesses will be vying for top honors at the Maiden Ghana Business Awards, which take place tonight at the Kempinski Hotel here in Accra. The award ceremony would recognize and reward excellence across all sectors of industry in the country. Latif Abubakar is project manager of the Ghana Business Awards, and he explains the criteria for selecting the winners.
We had a technical committee of experts across various industries that worked with relevant institutions to pick up companies that are excelling, especially with regards to standards, quality standards, and business standards one way or the other. And those companies were nominated. And if you are nominated, it doesn't mean that that is it. You have to go on the website to the series of questions that you need to submit, because we need extra facts and figures. So they go online, do those submissions. We receive those documents, put it together. There's a verification process that goes, auditing and verification process that goes through. We have a second technical committee that assesses those nominations, put their scorings to it, submit it to the awarding board, and then the awarding board makes a decision. So those are the processes. I mean, very credible process, very respected individuals and personalities forming the technical committee and the awarding board too as well. And then what to expect? I'm sure it's going to be a very exciting night. We have majority of the companies showing interest, and they've booked seats to participate, and they're expecting to win. Yes, a lot will win, but definitely some people will not win. But the good news is that even those who are shortlisted to be nominees, I can tell you on authority that it simply means that they are doing something very good in terms of standards.
Now, let's move on to another top story here. And President Akua has defended the move by the Chinese government to earmark $60 billion for infrastructure projects in Africa. According to the president, the facility provided does not constitute an aid, but rather a loan facility of which beneficiary countries are expected to pay back. He made the remark when answering a question at the ongoing 2018 Tony Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Forum in Lagos, Nigeria. The president was criticized for betraying Africa by accepting part of the facility at the recently held China-Africa Forum, despite the quest to develop Ghana and Africa beyond aid.
Borrowing money is not aid. What President Xi Jinping offered is a 60 billion fund which African countries can access, not as aid, but as loans. If you can produce a project that the Chinese think is worth supporting, you can have access to that money, but you have to pay it back. We will borrow money. Everybody borrows money. The United States of America is one of the biggest debtors in the world.
That's why we're in business.
Yeah, everybody borrows money. So borrowing money is not necessarily a betrayal of the concept of independence. No. The key for us in borrowing money is that we borrow money to create assets that would allow us to pay the money back. That's the key. Not to borrow the money and get involved with inflated contracts, misapplied, not properly thought out contracts, and burden ourselves so that one day we can't pay back. If we borrow the money and use it properly, it's an asset for us in expanding our economy, expanding our infrastructure. People want to invest in the development of railway in Nigeria. That's not dependence. That's investing in your infrastructure. And what it will do to promote business in Nigeria is the way you pay it back. There's no contradiction at all in supporting what the Chinese did and continuing to say that we have to stand on our own 2 feet to develop our country. No contradiction whatsoever.
Indeed, no contradiction. Interesting comments there by the president. We would like to throw more light on this. And joining me in the studio right now to have a closer assessment of the president's remarks at the Tony Elumelu Foundation Business Forum in Nigeria is Economist with Data Bank Courage Marty. Courage, you're welcome to the marketplace.
Thanks for having me.
Now, first of all, I want to find out from you, from an economist point of view, the difference between an aid and a loan facility.
Okay, so very basically, an aid is free money. Loan is money you have to pay back, and it also comes at a cost. So with the case of aid, you are given the money and you are supposed to use it without paying back, no time in the future. An example is when you look at our budgets, there is always a line for grants, aid or grants, right?
So those are aids?
Those are aids.
And not to be paid back?
Not to be paid back,
okay.
Right? Now, over the years, these grants have been very, very volatile in terms of flow to the budget. And this has always meant that the government doesn't own fiscal policy in entirety. Now, we need to shift beyond this level and find a way of owning fiscal policy, implementing the policies we want to implement as and when we program to implement them, so that we don't rely on the whims and caprices of these donor countries. Then the next stage is to mobilize more revenues. But in the short term, you cannot mobilize sufficient revenue. The alternative in the short term is to borrow. When you borrow, you have to pay back, unlike aid. And that is the distinction between borrowing and relying on aid.
Is it not using semantics here now? Because some schools of thought think that, when I give you an aid, it also, or when I give you a loan facility, even though I'm paying back, it also means that I'm aiding you to perhaps, move from your predicament stage to a more, stronger level.
But in the financial or economic term, aid in economic term is not just the word support, is not in that generic sense, right? It is in the sense of, is there something to be paid back in exchange for that support? There is nothing to be paid back for the aid that we get from them. If at all, there are conditions that are imposed on us, but it does not constitute financial flow in the future as a payment for the aid. But this is different from when you go for loans, right? So when a business goes for loan from the banks are also aiding them, providing capital, but it is not free money. The businesses have to turn around the capital and pay back with even interest.
Now, what's your reaction to, people who think that the president is actually backtracking on his words or his advocacy to move beyond aid, especially by going to China, the China Forum recently, to accept the fact that Chinese government is going to help us or Africa with $60 billion for infrastructure development.
Well, I think we need to calm down and have a discussion about what aid is, because certainly the two are totally different. They are on the opposite sides of the coin, right? Aid cannot be likened to loans or vice versa. I think the discussion should move beyond whether aid is loan or loan is aid to what do you invest the money in? Because we need to understand that you will pay back. To the extent that you will pay back, then let's move the discussion to scrutinizing what projects we invest the money in. If it was aid, it doesn't matter what you invest it in. You don't have to pay back. You can even use it to pay salaries. You can even use it to pay ghost workers. But because you don't have to pay back. But for as long as it is a loan, you need to invest it in viable projects that will generate returns for you to pay back. And that should be the discussion, and not this, confusing aids with loans or vice versa. They are different.
Interesting. I'll come back to you, but we've been joined on the phone lines now by a Sino-Africa expert who is also an economist. Paul Frimpong is on the line to also add his thoughts to this. Now, Paul, this is the marketplace. Now, what you also have to say about the president accepting categorically that aid is different from a loan facility, and that moving moving Africa beyond aid doesn't necessarily mean that we may not go for loans from some of these advanced countries.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Sorry I couldn't join the studio in person. You have to do it through. It's clear, as your guest in the studio has been saying, that there's a clear difference between what an aid is and what a loan is. Each of these instruments comes with terms, and based on those terms and those features, you can determine whether what the money you are getting is a loan or an aid. Obviously, for the last 6 or so decades, you've seen how trillions of dollars have been poured into Africa in the form of aid. And at the end of the day, we are still where we are. We still go begging all of these loans, but then we don't get the results, the economic impact that this money are supposed to make. So therefore, we've all come together and conclude as a continent that it's high time we move away from that system and actually come up with our own proactive programs and projects that can generate revenue.
All right.
And so we have that kind of discussion that has gone on. And now you've seen, of course, the controversy, the issue that you are mentioning about the current president of Ghana, in that what the government of Ghana is going for is a loan and not an aid. And it's clear as to what exactly we're going for, that this is a loan and not an aid. Okay? The terms of reference for each of these instruments are different. Okay? You can clearly indicate whether it is a loan or this is an aid.
All right, now, Paul, beyond this, what would be the impact? Don't you think that, in a way, still China could have, a field way with Africa, sort of a partitioning of the continent, so to speak?
I agree with you, Mr. Yafi, because basically none of these countries are doing philanthropy work. Okay, they put the money there, $60 billion, all 54, 55 countries of Africa can access, as long as you can provide viable projects to them, and then you'll be able to pay the money back. But of course, there's some laissez-faire attitude in terms of how they're going to engage you. So typically, the kinds of approach you would get when you approach a financial institution for money, you're not going to get that level of scrutiny. Okay, so that creates a room for somebody to have its way around you in terms of getting certain deals done in your country at the expense of your people. We are clear on that, right? That this money is a loan, but then it has some features that make it more relaxing than a typical loan that you go for. So in that sense of less relaxing movement that you have in assessing this loan, definitely China will have a way of getting a control over some aspect of the economy. But then it's happening all over. You look at the global stock, U.S. is leading, and they are the largest borrower of China's money. Okay, so in as much as we want a better way out, we are moving away from loan. What's the next best thing that we can do? We want to generate money internally to develop oil infrastructure. It's near impossible. We have issues with our revenue mobilization system.
All right.
Okay. So some of the infrastructure we want to develop, we need such money. Obviously, in the medium to short term, short to medium term, there could be some level of control from China in it now, but still, it's a way up the aid system that we've been enjoying over the years.
Thank you very much, Paul Frimpong, for that input there. Now, back to you, Courage. So, what's the way forward now? Should we continue, to borrow in the long term for infrastructure development, for instance?
Yes, I think, first of all, loan is neither good nor bad. It depends on what you want to invest in.
That's exactly what the president said.
Exactly. And even if you look at the U.S., for instance, the U.S. borrows. In fact, their biggest creditors are the Chinese. So loan in itself is not the devil. It is what you do with the loan. To the extent that it doesn't enable you to pay back, then that is where you see the devil being in the detail. So for me, the way forward, two-pronged. One, we need to ensure that the kind of borrowings we do are the borrowings that will not come back to haunt the taxpayer. They are borrowings that will be channeled into a portfolio of projects that will be self-financing. Two, of course, we have to increase domestic revenue performance. Over the last 3 consecutive years, revenue relative to target has been consistently underperforming. We need to increase and up the ante, because it is only when we increase our revenue performance then we can reduce the rate of borrowings that we do.
And increasing revenue performance always puts strain on the public.
Okay, so you have an economy that is 256 billion cedis. You have a total potential taxpayers that is 6 million people, but you have only about 1.5 million of these 6 million identified in the GRA books. So only 25% of the potential is being exploited here. Come to VAT. Only 11% penetration has been reached so far. There's so much potential. So there's, again, it's sounding like a cliche, but it is just the truth that we need to broaden the tax base. So that if you broaden the tax base, you can even reduce the tax rates per head and still get a lot more.
Thank you very much for your time. Courage Mate is an economist with Data Bank. But just before we go, Tullow Oil has assured that it will bring an end to works on its Jubilee Field turret bearing by the close of this year. The equipment on the FPSO Kwame Nkrumah, which is used in extracting crude from the seabed, has been under repairs over the past 2 years. This resulted in production shutdowns on the field, impacting negatively on tax payments and power production. Group Chief Finance Officer of Tullow tells Joy Business they are committed to dealing with the issue by December, and we'll be bringing you details on these in our subsequent bulletins. But for now, that's where we draw the curtains down on the marketplace. Many thanks for watching. My name is Emmanuel Abuaji. Have a good afternoon.